Chakshu Unmilitam Jena Tasmaya Shri Guruve Namaha Gurave Gaura Chandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tarabhaktaya Namo Namaha Yam Pravajantam Anapetyam Apetykrityam Dvaipaino Viraha Kata Ajuhava Putreti Tammaya Tayotaravo Benedustam Sarvabhutam Hridimunam Anatoshmi. I first of all offer millions and millions of Dandavat pranams unto the lotus feet of my most beloved Gurudev, Tilila Pravishta Om Astal Tarasara Shishimad Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And I offer the same again millions and millions of times unto the lotus feet of our most beloved Nityalila Pravishta Om Astal Tarasara Shishimad Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And unto the lotus feet of our most beloved preceptor Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Satchidananda Namine Gauda Shakti Swarupaya Rupanugabrayate. Our beloved Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, who is giving us this mercy of his Jaiva Dharma, and all the Vaishnav and Vaishnavi devotees of the Lord, and our Rupanuga Guru Varya, my Dandavat pranams to all of you. So now continuing with our reading from Jaiva Dharma, and we'll do the Falshruti again on the first 5 verses. Pritivite yata kata dharma name chale, bhagavata kahe sahe paripurna chale.
As indicated in Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 1st chapter, 2nd shloka, all the philosophies on the earth that are celebrated as dharma are utterly deceptive.
I was considering this today, and the most prominent example of rejecting dharma is performed by the Braja Gopis. The Braj Gopis gave up all their dharma, their earthly dharma, absolutely, totally, to run for the highest, that prem dharma, that highest purusartha, the 5th purusartha. They gave up all worldly. We can imagine young girls, dharmic natured young Indian girls, 5,000 years ago. Their lives would be depending on dharma, their shyness, their chastity, etc., their submissiveness to their elders. We see in Indian culture today just how submissive so many children are to their parents compared to the Western world. The Western world, it's the opposite. They leave home when they're 14 or 15 and never return very often. But here in India, it has that stability of civilized life. So in a civilized life, these dharmas that young women especially uphold, chastity, humility, etc. The gopis, napariyeham niravadya samyujam sa, they gave up yamabhajan durja geha shrinkala. They gave up these shackles of this material dharma very easily just to run to Krishna. So that's an example of rejecting the material dharma and embracing the higher precepts of dharma, this Jaiva dharma, Sanatana dharma, Vaishnava dharma, to embrace this, but to give up these 4-fold dharma, artha, karma, moksha, these 4-fold, purusarthas of life that most religions follow, etc. So the most extreme example of giving up these dharmas is the gopis of Vrindavan. So we are in the anugatya of the gopis. So we are following in their footsteps. So we're going to reject all naimitic dharma. That's what the 3rd chapter is entitled. Yes. Yes, we've said that many times. That last verse in the Bhagavad Gita, rejecting, abandoning all dharmas and not to worry. Chale dharma chari kare satya dharma mati
Chatuvaragya Tyaji Dara Nitya Prema Gati.
One should completely abandon such deceptive dharmas and observe his mind in true dharma. In other words, one should give up the fourfold goals of material life dharma, arth, kam, moksha and aspire solely for the ultimate destination of Nitya Prem.
Yes, this is the whole mood of this wonderful Shastra. It's such a powerful statement and gift to the world. And it's completely the antithesis of the way the world is generally running. So for the practitioner who's serious about making some headway in his spiritual progress, then he has to begin stepping back out of that material whirlpool of upward mobility, they call it, where we're trying to acquire various material objects for apparent momentary temporary happiness. This is not where our future lies at all in this direction. Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj saying one time that actually material qualifications are often a hindrance to spiritual life because you get some sort of material acclaim. People will pat you on the back, say what a great personality you are in the material world or whatever. But actually, this is futile for spiritual progress. Spiritual progress means rejecting that, rejecting Naimitic Dharma, giving that up. And Vedavyas, he was writing so many histories with this as the root goal. But then in the Srimad Bhagavatam we've discussed, when Nara came, then he had the trance, and in that bhasya, that samadhi bhasya, then he understood that actually that prem pursartha is the essence of the goal. That is the place we're looking for.
Amitva mimamsa brahme nija jada buddhi nirvishesha brahma gyan nahi chitta shuddhi.
Those who are deluded identify themselves with matter. That is their error. However, one cannot be purified of such delusion by endeavors for Nirvishesh Brahm Gyan.
Because that's the alternative. If you're not a bhakta, then you would probably settle for the goal of Nirvishesh Brahm. That's the impersonal realization. That's what that is. That's the same as the Devas. The Devas, they have that same Brahman goal because it's described Brihaspati, the spiritual master of the Devas, is described as being Brahman realized. So he's the spiritual master. So what does it speak for all his followers, etc.? So they only know about that Brahman, which is Nirvishesh Brahm, which ultimately is a cheating process. It's because it's the qualities in that Nirvishesh Brahm we've discussed are Gyan and Vairagya. They don't have the principal qualities of personality within them. I've described before, Gyan and Vairagya are like impersonal qualities. So that realm is an impersonal realm. There's no personal form in that realm. It's an impersonal realm. Nirvishesh. Nir means without, vishesh, without dress or speciality. Nirvishesh Brahmagyan. And this was the condition actually in the beginning when Sannyasi Thakur, he was a Brahmagyani. So he had that misconception. So it's very beautifully showing how Bhaktivinoda Thakur is purifying that misconception from Paramahamsa Babaji speaking to Sannyasi Thakur in the first 2-3 chapters.
Ivichitrata hina hale nirvishesh hoy kala samutilya seha aprakrita noy.
The Mayavadi thinks Sri Krishna to be subject to the limitations of time, such as birth and death, and considers that he is not transcendental. Thus, he rejects Sri Bhagavan's Vichitrata, astonishing characteristics, paraphernalia, qualities, and Leela. Through this vicious attempt, he is left with the philosophy of Nirvishesh Brahm.
So it's very similar to the previous verse. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's being very repetitive here because there's two principal points he wants to make. Leave the material dharmas, don't put any energy in there, and don't become involved in Nirvishesh Brahm simultaneously. But he's building through this Falshruti to the last verse of just accepting Amala Prem Seva. These are all stepping stones to coming to the final Amala Prem Seva. And that's exactly like this divine book of Jaiva Dharma, gradually leading us through there.
Kande gyana hoya dharma ache sunishchaya prakriti hoya syabu aprakrita naya.
Such base and contemptible gyan which arises out of an attempt to dismember the divine form of Bhagavan is only fit to be rejected. It is prakrita, materialistic, and should never be given credence as aprakrita dham.
Yes, never become confused and think that the mystical path or the phantasmagoria of wonderment has any substance of personality to it. We are looking to create our sambandha, our relationship with a person, with an individual, not with a void-like space, not with this shantaras or anything of that nature, not an impersonal path. So this sambandha gyan is the first requirement for the practicing sadhak to fully absorb himself in. What is my relationship with Krishna, the jiva, and the material energy, these three vastus, and what is the relationship between them? This is sambandha gyan. I am an eternal servant of Krishna, and my relationships with the jiva, I see the jiva, all jivas have paramatma within them, so my respect for all jivas is there, and the material energy is the dull, jud material energy, or the mayic, the attraction. So I have to see this, and what is my relationship with these three? But my principal relationship is to know understand my relationship with Guru and our Guru Vargya. And if I'm submissive there, then that will bring me to the lotus feet of Sri Krishna as his eternal servant, Jivara Sarupoi Krishna Nitya Das. So this is the principal goal. This is where we're going. Okay, so let's go back to our subject matter. So I think we're on page 348. Is that correct?
Yes.
You sure?
No,
I don't.
no.
Yeah, the last thing we read yesterday was very incredible. We were reading about Krishna, Ishvara, his qualities. First, we read a little bit about the non-difference between Krishna and Ishvara, and then we read about the absolute distinction of Ishvara. That was our subject matter yesterday. We went through that very carefully. So I'm going to read the last paragraph of Babaji's conclusion on this topic about the Ishvara and Jiva. So this establishes the eternal difference between the Jiva and Ishvara, and all learned people support this. That means this is the understood Siddhanta. Just like, for example, the understood Siddhanta is that we did not fall from Vaikuntha. That is the, in the global view, this is the understanding of all Gaudiya Siddhanta, that we did not fall from Vaikuntha. This is only one society that takes that opinion, that goal, that idea. This difference is not imaginary, but eternal. It does not disappear in any state of the jiva. What is it that's not disappearing? Is the distinction of Ishvara's greatness and the jiva's insignificance. This is eternal. Always Ishvara, aham eva sam eva gre. It's saying in the Chaturshloki of the second canto that before there was anything in existence, there was only Krishna. That means only Krishna and his parikas, etc. But that was all that existed. So Krishna has always been there. So the jivas were manifested from Baladev Prabhu, the Vibhinamsa Tattva, from the Chit Shakti, manifesting through Jiva Shakti. Consequently, the statement that the Jiva is an eternal servant of Krishna should be accepted as a fundamental statement, a Mahavakya. This is very beautiful, final sentence. Consequently, the statement that the Jiva is an eternal servant of Krishna. This is the point. This is the conclusion of Sambandha Gyan. We just spoke, Sambandha Gyan. This is the conclusion, that I am an eternal servant of Krishna. If that is fully in place, then my impurity of even being in this world has radically been purified. I'm only in this world because I turned away from Krishna. Vimukh, it's going to be described in the next chapter. The Jiva, he turns away from Krishna. As soon as he turns away from Krishna, what happens? Material desires spring in his heart. That's natural, because the Jiva has to enjoy. He's an enjoyer by nature. So if he's not relishing his service to Krishna, he's immediately going to look for relish in the material domain. And that means he has to have material desires. So as soon as you turn away from Krishna, what happens is material desires come in your heart. And as soon as material desires in your heart come, then what happens? Immediately, it's like a mathematical equation, equals suffering. Because material desires can never be satisfied. It's just like an ever-burning fire. You can never satisfy them, because everything ultimately is temporary. And you can never find that position where you can actually have all of your desires satisfied. It's just completely impossible. They may appear to be satisfied for a period of time, but the adhyatmic, adhibautic, and adaivic are built in, because this is not our home. This is not our place. Krishna has arranged this formula for purification. The jiva is being beaten with the hammers in this material world to purify him of this disgrace, we can say, of turning away from Krishna. Krishna is that most attractive personality, and we have vimukh, we've turned away from him. So that's the conclusion of yesterday. Now, today, Brajanath, if one can only prove the eternal difference between the Ishvara and Jiva, how can one accept the oneness? But actually, Babaji's already explained the oneness. In the beginning, he explained this Bhakta Swarup, Nata Swarup, Gyan Swarup, Mantri Swarup, Swapakash, Ketra Gyan. These, yes, all these things. Another point is that if there is oneness, do we have to accept a state of merging with Ishvara, Nirvana? This is the meaning of Nirvana, is merging with. Understand how Bhaktivinoda Thakur is brilliantly crafting this book. He knows this is not an easy subject matter particularly. So he's being repetitious with the different explanations. He's finding an excuse to go over it again, to come from this angle. Actually, we as sadhaks should become even more repetitious and read the whole chapter again and again and again and again. Because I promise, every time we read it, we're going to find newer and newer appreciations and realizations. The more our own sadhan bhajan has deepened, just from yesterday to today, we're going to perceive it more clearly, with more clarity. So Babaji, no, not at all. The jiva is not one with Krishna at any stage, because the oneness that he's talking about is like a Mayavad oneness. It's not the oneness in purpose, like we can say in some, from some perspective, yes, the jiva is one with Krishna, in the sense that jiva is the servant and Krishna is the master. So if they are linked with the same mood of affection, we can say there's like a oneness there from that perspective. But if the jiva becomes like, that's called ahangopasika. That is completely a mayavad, misconception. So Babaji is saying, no, not at all. The jiva is not one with Krishna at any stage. Brajanath, then why have you spoken about achintya bheda abheda, inconceivable oneness and difference? But he's already explained this. He explained it, the oneness was there. We are Sat Chit Ananda. We have the same energy as Krishna, and we have independence like Krishna, this swatantrata. We have that independence also. But we are anuchit, Krishna is vibhuchit. Babaji, from the qualitative perspective of chit dharma, there is oneness between Krishna and the jivas. That's what we've already explained. That's what we've just said now. From the quality, Sat Chit Ananda, that quality is there in Krishna and it's there in the jiva. The jiva has consciousness. The jiva has independence. Krishna has consciousness. Krishna has independence. So there's a oneness there. But the quantity is vastly different. Between Krishna and the, but from the quantitative perspective of their essential nature and individual personalities, Swarup, there is eternal difference between them. Otherwise, how could there be flourishing love and affection? If there was so much similarity, how could there be so much affection between? When there's such distinction, actually what can be inspired is so much attraction. The jiva, in his pure samadhi bhasya, in his pure bhajan, he can generate such amazing moods of devotion to Krishna. We read so many pastimes like Ambarish Maharaj. His devotion to Krishna was supreme. You know, so many persons like the Goswamis of Vrindavan, what austerities they undertook to please Mahaprabhu. What was the nature of their devotion? Rupa Goswami was enumerating so many scriptures at the same time uncovering holy place, at the same time living such an externally austere life. But their dedication to pleasing Krishna, and what to speak of the gopis, their dedication to pleasing Krishna just surpasses all other considerations. So this is the mood. There is eternal difference between them. Despite the eternal oneness, it is the perception of difference that is eternally prominent. Yes, it's like I often give the example of taking a spoonful of water from the ocean. The water in the spoon is exactly the same quality as the water in the ocean, but the difference is just enormous. So we really have to appreciate this deeply. I mean, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying it repeatedly because he knows that we need to really get this clearly embedded, not just hear it intellectually. I mean, the mind works in different ways. First of all, we hear it in the intellect, and then through our chanting and bhajan, etc., we start to take it into the realized place of the heart and realize these truths. And then we become fearless. Though the Abhed Swarup is an accomplished fact, there is no indication that any such state has independent existence. So let me read that again. Though the Abhed, that's the difference, Swarup, is an accomplished fact, there is no indication that any such state has independent existence. So what does that mean?
Abhed is non-difference.
Non-difference, sorry, yes, non-difference. So the non-difference is an accomplished fact. There is no indication that any such state has independent existence. So even though we are separate and we have an independent will, but actually we're manifesting from that same source. Like the particles in the rays of the sun. It's described one analogy, or the sparks from a fire. The sparks are emanating from the fire, The sparks haven't just manifested by themselves. The fire could have manifested by itself because the fire is completely independent. The fire is Krishna. But the sparks don't just manifest by themselves. Neither do the particles in the rays of the sun manifest by themselves. Rather, it is the manifestation of Nitya Bhed, eternal difference, that is always prominent. So this is what Babaji explained, what we talked about yesterday. This absolute difference is what we were really hearing yesterday. In other words, where eternal difference and eternal oneness are present simultaneously, the perception of Bheda is stronger. The perception of difference is stronger. For example, let us say the owner of a house is called Devata, Devadatta. His house is simultaneously Adevadatta, independent of Devadatta, and Sadevadatta, identified with Devadatta. Okay? Even though, from some points of view, it may be considered independent of Devadatta. Yes, depends how we look at it. Still, its specific characteristic of being identified with Devadatta eternally exists. It's always that identity that is going to exist. Similarly, in the case of Ishvara and the Jivas, non-difference or oneness is not part of the essential identity, even at the stage of Swarup Siddhi, just as the house can be called both Adevata, Devadatta, and Sadevadatta. From one perspective, it may be viewed as Adevadatta, but still the real identity is Sadevadatta, with Devadatta. Still his identity is there, present within it. So still being a servant of Krishna is always going to be the eternal understanding of the Jivatma. He's always the servant. Krishna is always the master. That's the distinction. Let me give you another example from the material world. Sky as a material element, is a material element, and there is also a basis for its existence. But even though the basis is present, only the sky is actually visible. What is the basis of sky? Air, atmosphere, space. Yes, that's the backdrop, and we're seeing the sky. Similarly, even within the abed, the difference, existence, the distinctive nitya bed, eternal similarity, which is real, is found. And that is why nitya bed is the only definitive characteristic of the essential reality vastu. Explain.
The difference is eternal difference is very prominent over the non-difference, and that is because of its prominent only that is visible. Just like how when you look at the sky, there is air, ether, everything, but you cannot see the air, ether, and you can see the whole sky, which is you can relate it to non-eternal non-difference, and the air or ether, which is a part of it, is called as is related to the abed.
Okay, yes. It's not so complicated, it's quite simple. And this is the essential vastu, the essential reality. Vastu is that all abiding substance that can't be broken down. So that's the ultimate of vastu. Rajanath, please explain the eternal nature of the jiva even more clearly. This is okay. The jiva, Babaji is answering. I'll say the question again. Rajanath, please explain the eternal nature of the jiva even more clearly. Babaji, the jiva is atomic consciousness and is endowed with the quality of knowledge and is described by the word aham. He is the enjoyer, the thinker, and the one who comprehends. The jiva has an eternal form which is very subtle, just as the different parts of the gross body, the hands, legs, nose, eyes, and so on, combine to manifest a beautiful form when established in their respective places. Similarly, a very beautiful atomic spiritual body is manifest, which is composed of different spiritual parts. However, when the jiva is entangled in Maya, that spiritual form is covered by two material bodies. One of these is called the subtle body, Linga Sarir, and the other is called the gross body, Sthula Sarir. The subtle body, which is the first to cover the atomic spiritual body, is unavoidable, apariyar, apariharya, from the beginning of the jiva's conditioned state until his liberation. The jiva can never be liberated until he's purified of that subtle body. Until that subtle body has been dropped, that subtle body is composed of mind, intelligence, and false ego. So all of that has to be totally purified for the jiva to relinquish that body totally. I'll read that again because it's a very important point. One of these, however, when the jiva is entangled in Maya, that spiritual form is covered by two material bodies. One of these is called the subtle body, Linga Sarira, and the other is called the gross body, Sthula Sarira. The subtle body, which is the first to cover the atomic spiritual body, is unavoidable, apariharya, from the beginning of the jiva's conditioned state until his liberation. It's described in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 12, verse 2, that Lord Brahma, he creates these 5 nascent engagements, that's what they're called, that he places over the atomic jiva. When the jiva first enters this world, that is attachment to matter, bewilderment, confusion about the reality of the world around him, fear of death, anger after frustration, and the illusion of being the possessor of different material objects. These 5 like coverings are placed over the jiva. Otherwise, the jiva couldn't stay in this world if he didn't have those coverings. So those are subtle coverings. So those subtle coverings over the pure body are there to allow the jiva to fulfill his material desires. The jiva comes to this world because of his material, because he's turned away from Krishna, and the consequence of turning away from Krishna, I've just described, these material desires spring in the heart. He wants to enjoy matter. So if he wants to enjoy matter, he has to have these coverings over his pure body. He has to be afraid of death. He has to have this desire for possessiveness, etc. And he has to be bewildered by the material energy. So these 5 nescient, and Lord Brahma is very unhappy to do that, but that's part of his duty, that he has to cover the jivas. And then he gives up that body out of disgust because he doesn't like that idea of having to do that. But this is in the 3rd canto, chapter 12, 2nd verse. You can read it yourselves. When the jiva transmigrates from one body to the next, the gross body changes, but the subtle body does not. The subtle body doesn't change. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's described like the aroma. It goes from one part to another. That's what the subtle body is like when it's changing. The subtle body carries on, but only the gross body is there. So don't think that just because of the time of death, all our various mental problems are going to cease. We're actually going to carry them into the next body in different forms, but the same essence of the desire where we created those mental distractions is still going to be present. When the jiva transmigrates from one body to the next, the gross body changes, but the subtle body does not. Rather, as the jiva leaves the gross body, the subtle body carries all its karmas and desires to the next body. Yam yam vapi smaram bhavam tyajati antikalevaram. Whatever you desire at the time of death, that's what's going to manifest. This is what Bhagavad Gita is describing, the same thing. The jivas' change of body and transmigration are carried out through the science of Panch Agni, the five fires, which are delineated in the Vedas. The system of Panch Agni, such as the funeral fire, the fire of digestion, and rain, has been described in the Chandogya Upanishad and Brahma Sutra. The jiva's conditioned nature in the new body is the result of the influences from his previous births. So these are our various sanskars, our sukritis, our karmas, etc., that are going to manifest our next birth. Whatever we're doing now, we're creating the next body, so to speak. That's why when we are practicing our various sadhan bhajans, then we are trying to focus on that highest transcendental world, try to fix that transcendental consciousness so that that will be a reality at the time of death. That will be our desire. The jiva's conditioned nature in the new body is the result of the influences from his previous births, and his nature determines the varna in which he takes birth. After entering Varnashram, he begins to perform karma again, and when he dies, he repeats the same process. The first covering and the eternal spiritual form is the subtle body, and the second is the gross body. So this gross body and its gross desires have really nothing to do with the spiritual body at all. The gross body is like this yantarudrani, this like a machine that is operating. What's that verse in Bhagavad Gita? You remember? I forget this verse. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hridesha rajuna tishtati brahmayan sarva bhutani yantarudrani mayaya. The Supreme Lord said, the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. So this body is like a machine that is made of the material energy. The stula sarir, this is the gross body. This is like the machine made of the material energy modes, but the subtle body is within that. And many times, even devotional practitioners, they get confused between the subtle realizations and the transcendental realizations. The subtle realizations we call sometimes the astral plane. So those astral realizations have nothing to do with transcendence. They're just phenomena of the subtle world, like the mystical various experiences that people may have. There was one beautiful, famous example when Prabhupada was alive. One girl was saying, "Oh, Prabhupada, every time I chant, I see this beautiful red light." And Prabhupada said, "Don't worry, it'll go away soon." Like, don't get caught up in various subtle phenomena or astral phenomena, because devotees certainly experience these types of things while they're practicing. All kinds of different subtleties can take place with the power of the chanting, but just focus on the service to Sri Krishna. This is where we've been leading. This is where we've been discussing. This is the principle of Sambandha Gyan, the jiva's identity. We just went through this achintya, astonishing, beda, abeda. We've just gone through it very deeply. So this distinction between Ishvara and the jiva. So if we remain with that mood of our submissiveness to Krishna, even though some subtle phenomena may appear attractive again, it's all part of the material mayic aspect of trying to distract us away from our pure goal. After entering Varnashram, he begins to perform karma again, and when he dies, he repeats the same process. The first covering of the eternal spiritual form is the subtle body, and the second is the gross body. So this is what he's described. Actually, we have three bodies. We have a spiritual body, we have a subtle body, and we have a gross body. So appreciate this distinction again. Bhaktivinoda Thakur's been, where else can you read about it so graphically except in Jaiva Dharma like this? We read about it throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam also, when Maharaj Yudhisthira, he's amalgamating all the life airs, etc., and he's leaving the body, he's describing the same journey out of the gross mentality. Prithu Maharaj also describing the same. Even Dhritarashtra, in his yogic experiences, was describing relinquishing the gross body. So there's many examples in the Bhagavatam, but when we have it so explicitly like this, it's very simple to accommodate for the consciousness, for the mind to accept. Rajanath, what is the difference between the eternal spiritual body and the subtle body? Okay, so this is a nice question, because it seems, as I've been saying, the subtle body can also can appear to be like very attractive in the various phenomena that you can experience with, like subtle sound, etc. All kinds of subtleties, like in music, for example, when we become very inspired or intoxicated with beautiful musical arrangements, how they can affect the consciousness. They're affecting the subtle part of the mind. It's not a spiritual experience, it's a subtle experience. We have to completely distinguish between the two. Babaji, the eternal body is the actual original body, and it is atomic, spiritual, and faultless. Why is it like that? Because it's come from Chit Shakti. It's manifesting from the Chit Shakti, but it's become covered when it's placed in the Jiva Shakti, and it's become, because of its nature as being tatashta, which means marginal, which means it can either be submissive to Krishna because it has independence. This is the point. Krishna has given us this independence. And with our independence, we can choose, because we have to be independent to love. That's why we have independence. We have the independence to love Krishna or not love Krishna, to be attracted to Krishna or not be attracted to Krishna. That's why we have independence. This is also going to be described in the next chapter. The eternal body is the actual original body, and it is atomic, spiritual, and faultless. This is the real object of the ego, the real I, not the false ego. We have an ego, the real ego, but then we have this, what we call the false ego. This is our misidentification with the body as being myself. This is the misidentification. This is why Bhaktivinoda Thakur in the Falshruti is constantly just saying, give up all these materially conceived of dharmas, because they're identifying with this material body. All these dharmas in this material world are identifying with the material, social, economic aspect of our lives. And this is all temporary. It's not eternal. This is the real object of the ego, the real I. The subtle body arises from contact with matter, and it consists of three vitiated transformations, namely of the mind, intelligence, and ego. So the mind is transformed, the intelligence is transformed, and the ego is transformed to become the false ego. So these three aspects, the mind, intelligence, it's described in the 11th canto, I've said a number of times, when Uddhav, he asks Krishna in the 29th chapter, in the 10th verse, 11, 29, 10, Uddhav says, if the soul is completely pure and without any fault, how come he's attracted to Maya? Where is this attraction coming from? And Krishna responds. He says, the foolish spirit soul. Let me just read it to you because it's very beautiful and it's very pertinent here in what we're saying. It'll give you an insight into this more clearly. 29. Oops, no. So I think it's 28. Sorry, 28, not 29. Chapter. Yes, Sri Uddhav said, "My dear Lord, it is not possible for this material existence to be the experience of either the soul, who is the seer, or of the body, which is the seen object. On the one hand, the spirit soul is innately endowed with perfect knowledge, and on the other hand, the material body is not conscious, is not a conscious living entity, the material body. To whom then does the experience of material existence pertain? Who is doing this material? You understand the question? I'll read the, there's a commentary here. Since the living entity, can you close the doors? Since the living entity is pure spirit soul, since the living entity is pure spirit soul, innately full of perfect knowledge and bliss, and since the material body is a biochemical machine without knowledge or personal consciousness, the material body is just a quiet material object. Who or what is actually experiencing the ignorance and anxiety of this material existence? The conscious experience of material life cannot be denied, and thus Uddhav asked Lord Krishna this question to elicit a more precise understanding of the process by which illusion occurs. So this is completely supportive of what we're reading here. So now the next verse, then again, Uddhav says, the spirit soul is inexhaustible, transcendental, pure, self-illuminous, and never covered by anything material. It is like fire, but the non-living material body, like firewood, is dull and unaware. So in this world, who is it that actually undergoes the experience of material life? You understand? Clearly. Okay, now, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, as long as the foolish spirit soul remains attracted to the material body, it's my responsibility. We have to take this responsibility. As long as the foolish spirit soul remains attracted to the material body, senses, and vital force, this material existence continues to flourish, although it is ultimately meaningless. This material existence has no meaning, except for the jiva to connect with Krishna. It has no meaning whatsoever, except for this is what Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying all the time in the Falshruti, give up these dharmas. It has no significance. There's nothing important to it at all. This material world is not an important place. All the people living in this material world are trying to make it sound like an important place, trying to intimidate us with our various, ideas of importance, and we get attracted to that. But the spirit soul, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati describes, has given the power of attorney over, the soul has given the power of attorney over to the body. Power of attorney means complete control of his self to the body. The soul has forfeited his own existence to support the existence of the material body. It's quite terrifying what we've actually done. Can you understand? Like the soul has done that. So now we have to work back through purificatory process, because the soul is only pure. So we have to purify all this garbage that we've picked up through many births of our misconceptions of holding on to this material body. And gradually we come into the subtle realm, and gradually that mind, intelligent, false ego, that also has to become purified. But the wonderful hope is that we have heard and we know that the power of the Mahamantra can actually shatter this illusion completely, because it's my illusion that is holding on to these misconceptions. Once that illusion gets purified, and this is what Jaiva Dharma is giving us, it's giving us a factual understanding of the situation. And once we have that understanding, we can start to make real headway towards purifying this misconceived situation where we're living. Understand? It's a very wonderful, incredible, but with the power of the holy name and the power of our Guru Vargya, this Avaroha Panta, the power of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's um, Guru Vargya, the power of Rupa Goswami, etc. These great, great generals, they will assist us. All the saintly personalities will assist us to bring us back first to our materially pure condition, and then from there to our subtly pure condition of mind, intelligence, and false ego, purifying it to the actual ego, and then pure service to Krishna can actually manifest. And it begins in service, because service is most purifying, because that's our original position. Jivara Swarupoi Krishnera Nityadas. We are eternal servants of Krishna. So when I'm acting out, or when I'm practicing my service to Krishna in this world, Krishna will accept that as our sincere desire to actually reinstate my consciousness in the real spiritual realm. It's very simple in one sense, but the actual acts of it, there's the sadhan bhajan to perform that, because it has to become 24/7. Ahoitiki apratihata. What we say, savai pumsam parodama, yato bhakti hoisaje. Ahoitiki apratihata, yeyatma suprasidati. It has to be uninterrupted and unmotivated. This savai pumsam parodama, what is the Dharma for all humanity? That worship of Adhoksaja, that inconceivable Lord. And how must that worship be manifesting, be carrying on? Is uninterrupted and unmotivated. And with that practice, that will ye atma suprasidati, means satisfy the soul, but not the material soul. This will satisfy paramatma. This will satisfy the super soul. And when super soul is satisfied, that means my jivatma soul is naturally going to become connected to the supreme source in service. You understand? It's all basic stuff that I'm saying. It's just Bhagavad Gita, really. And it's just Srimad Bhagavatam. But it's hearing it again and again and again and again. But this is what Bhaktivinoda Thakur was saying. I'm just going to read that last sentence again. The subtle body arises from contact with matter, and it consists of three vitiated transformations, namely of the mind, intelligence, and ego. Yes, the mind, intelligence, ego, they have been transformed to believe in the gross conception. Just like right in the first chapter, we had this Nishag example of the ice being transformed from water into ice. It's come into another form. It's called its acquired nature. Nishag is the word. It's a beautiful description. We've got this acquired nature of this bodily identity, but it's not our real nature. Brajanath, the mind, intelligence, and ego, material entities, if they are, how do they have qualities of knowledge and activity? So understand the question. The mind, intelligence, and ego, they're material elements. Actually, they're subtle elements. Oh, he's saying, are mind, intelligence, and ego material entities? Sorry. If they are, how do they have the qualities of knowledge and activities? So Babaji is answering with this beautiful 3 verses from Bhagavad Gita. Bhumya apanalo vyayu karma mano buddhiya evacha. Ahankara ityam me bina prakritiya ashtada. Apariyaham itastva anyam prakritim vidi me param. Jiva bhutam mahabaho ya yedam daryate jagat. Etad yoni bhutani sarvanti upayaraya. Aham krishnasya jagata prabhava palayastaha. This is Bhagavad Gita 7:4 and 6. My separated eightfold Apara, or Maya Prakriti, consists of 5 gross elements. We're talking about the distinction. He's asked originally about the constitution of the jiva. So Babaji has very beautifully broken it down from the atomic spiritual particle of pure chit identity coming into the subtle, the linga sarya, and then the stula sarya. So now we're hearing a description of the stula sarya. What is the material elements? The gross elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and space. And 3 subtle elements. This is his question just now. Mind, intelligence, and false ego. Besides this, O mighty Arjun, I have a tatashta prakriti, which can also be called para prakriti, superior nature. Yes, I am made of this tatashta energy. So that means that I have a spiritual inclination as well as the capacity to act. I have the constitution to enjoy matter to some degree, and it keeps me going. There's a little drop. You know, it reminds me of the pastime in the 7th canto that my Gurudev would describe when the person running away from the tiger falls into a well, and in the bottom of the well there's all snakes, and he grabs hold of 2 branches of 2 trees and two roots of 2 trees, and the tiger is above him, and he's holding the roots of the, and then he notices that the black rat and a white rat are chewing away at the very roots that he's holding onto. So he's doomed. He's completely doomed. He's got the tiger on top, he's got the snakes below, and black and white represent night and day, time, are chewing away at the creepers that he's hanging onto. But somehow he's disturbed a tree overhead, and it's got a honey hive in it, and it's dropping some drips of honey right past his mouth, and he's putting his tongue out and tasting the honey, thinking, oh, how sweet. So there's some like sweetness, Jad Ananda, to be attracted to in this world. And that's why we keep on doing it again and again. And what's the principal enjoyment in this world is sex life, gross and subtle. The subtle sex life is fame, adoration, and distinction. This is subtle. And if you're not involved, not attracted to the gross, then you're attracted to the subtle somehow. This fame, adoration, and distinction, pratishta. So all this is there. This is we think we're getting some taste from this quality in this world, but it's not. It's all dull. It's all jad. It's described as a jad anand, the bliss of dead pleasure. But it's still there. And this is still remarkably coming from the Hladini Shakti all the way down. That dull ananda, any type of pleasure, it's all coming, originating from the Hladini.
No.
Electricity problem. I hope it's okay. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. Besides this, O mighty Arjun, I have a tatashta prakriti, which can also be called para prakriti, superior nature. That prakriti is in the form of consciousness and jivas. All the jivas who have manifested from this para prakriti make the inert world full of consciousness. We all have consciousness. The Jiva Shakti is called Tatashta because it is eligible for both worlds, the spiritual world, which is manifest from my Antaranga Shakti, and the material world, which is manifest from my Bahiranga Shakti. Since all created entities are manifested from these 2 types of Prakriti, you should know that I, Bhagavan, am the sole original cause of creation and destruction of all the worlds of the moving and non-moving beings. So again, he's reinforcing the conception of the distinction between Ishvara and the Jiva, and now he's analyzing the Jiva very, very beautifully. He's giving us a very clear picture of the constitution of the Jiva. So I'm going to stop here, and we'll explain more of this fascinating topic tomorrow. We've almost finished this chapter. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, they can text them in, and we can throw them around. Yesterday we had a nice question come. We were talking about the different types of jivas, and someone was asking, what type of jiva are the kaya vyuha of Sri Radhika? Are they Bibinamsa Tattva? Are they Swamsa Tattva? Where are the kaya vyuha of Radhika coming from? Those coming from her own body. Where are they categorized? So they are categorized the same as Vishnu Tattva. Coming from her body is like Swamsa. Swamsa, Swa, Angsa. Like the avatars. They're all coming directly from the body of Krishna, the Angsi. So the Kaya Vyuha are coming directly from Radhika's body. So they are non-different to the Swangsa. And you can please reference this in the Adi Lila chapter 4, verse 80. 80 or 81? I think it's verse 80. No, 81. In 81, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada gives a very nice commentary on exactly this. He's describing how the those Lakshmis in Vaikuntha, they are Vaibhav Vilas, expansions. And the queens, they are Vaibhav Prakash. But those direct expansions from Radhika's body, those Kaya Vyuha, they are the same as Vishnu Tattva. That means they are Swangsa. So just for your information, that is the position of the Kaya Vyuha Jivas that are manifesting from Radhika's body. So all glories to Jaiva Dharma. Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur ki jai, Jaiva Dharma ki jai, Anantakota Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol, Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhabhevacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namaha, Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol.